Welcome to Cardboard Hunter. I'm Sterling, and hear me out. So, over 100 years since the original iteration of the Landlord's game, Monopoly has aged like a fine milk. And I figured, why not try to make cheese out of that? That's terrible. That's disgusting. Let's move on. So what we're doing today is I'm going to go over what I call Blankopoly Redux.
It's Godzilla! It looks like Godzilla, but due to international copyright laws, it's not.
Which is where I've taken Monopoly Vanilla and given it a facelift. And I'm not the first to do that, and I'll discuss more about that later, but I think I've done it better than everybody else. This sounds like a really random idea, and this would have quite literally been the only game I could have guaranteed people would never show up on my channel. And you know what? Here we are. It kind of started as a joke to begin. I had been at Tantrum Con, what's that been, about a month and a half ago. And I was playing a certain game that has dragons, growing old until your turn comes, and digging through the rule book to see if this was all just one big elaborate April Fool's joke, of which I'm still not convinced. That's harsh. It's really not that bad. Primarily due to me and Brad of Bad at Board Games.
Hello and welcome to Bad at Board Games.
Sitting down and playing a 5-player game, having to learn it first, and a lot of table talk. It was the first time that me and Brad had a chance to sit down and meet each other, talk, and play a game together. So yeah, we probably were hanging out more than actually playing the game. Now, I still feel confident in saying I'm not interested in giving it a second shot. I'm a board game prude. I'm allowed to say that. But after that game, me and a friend got to discussing it, and you know, the wound was fresh, and I was being a bit hyperbolic and said, you know, I would rather play Monopoly over giving that game a second chance. And we laughed, and then I stopped and said, no, hold up, wait, I may mean that. And I determined if I were permitted to make a few slight adjustments to Monopoly, that I absolutely would rather play Monopoly than a lot of modern board games. So, like anyone with ADHD who just wasted 3 hours of their life that they would never get back, I then wasted another month of my life to prove a point. And I think you'd be surprised, this is actually pretty fun. So let's talk about the journey here. Obviously, I had to absorb an incredible amount of content to get to a point where I thought I could tackle this. One of the first things I had to do was admit that Vanilla Monopoly was not as bad as we made it out to be. And I'm not saying that it's a good game. It's literally trash. I'm fine saying that. But we are lying to ourselves if we're not admitting that it gave us some incredibly fun and joyous moments that we spent with our family growing up. And I had to sit back and really think about what were those things that made those game nights of Monopoly so spectacular when we were kids, playing a game of Monopoly with our family. And what were the painful, gruesome moments that made us never want to go back to it? And during this journey, I came across a content creator named Oats Jenkins, who made a video called I Fixed Monopoly. And before I start dismantling that, I want to say out the gate, I think it's a brilliant video. I really enjoyed it. I think he knocked it out of the park. I think he absolutely accomplished what he states he accomplished. However, he's not a modern board game designer, so the chances of him making a game that is truly worth playing were pretty slim. But he definitely succeeded in modernizing Monopoly and taking out the bad mechanics that are sinful in today's modern board game design and replacing them with mechanics that are more welcomed in modern board game design. However, if you actually talk to a seasoned modern board game designer, they'll tell you you can make a bad board game that's fun, and you can make a good board game that's not fun. And if you have to go in one direction, lean towards fun. Oats Jenkins may have fixed the game mechanically, but he did not necessarily make a game that was more fun than the original. I argue the exact opposite happened. But what was fascinating about this is so many of the initial ideas I had when I was approaching this were the same that Oats had had. So my first thoughts were, okay, someone's literally already done the exact thing I was thinking about doing. I guess I'm done here. But then I started watching it and realizing why both mine and Oats' initial thoughts weren't exactly the proper way to approach this if you wanted to actually make a game worth playing. I came at it a different way. Like I said, I approached this first having to admit what Monopoly did right. And some of that right was in the homebrew rules we all played with growing up. If you talk to any modern Monopoly player, and there actually is a big Monopoly circuit, they'll tell you, oh, well, no one ever played by the real rules. The game plays much faster and much better if you actually read the rule book and play it correctly. A few points. A, yes, I actually have played Monopoly by the intended actual rules. I do think it makes it a better game. As I expressed what Oats had accomplished, it makes it a less fun game. It's tighter economically, but I refute that none of us actually read a rule book growing up. We only had a few games. We had a Monopoly, Scrabble Life, Risk, maybe a handful of games. A lot of people's collection may have literally only been Monopoly. I'm telling you, we didn't all forget to read the rule book. If you want to know where those home rules came from, they were a product of our then environment. Because if I'm going to have a board game night today, I don't want to be done in an hour and a half, 2 hours. I want to play 4 or 5 hours of board games. And, you know, I'd like my games to end in an hour and a half to 2 hours so I can squeeze quite a few games in. But when we only had one game, yeah, we did want it to run 4 or 5 hours, if not more, because that was the whole board game night. And, you know, we didn't really have internet, and TV had all these advertisements. We didn't want to deal with that. It was just nice to sit down with your family and break out the game and play it for a whole evening. That's why we all home ruled it that way. And yes, the free parking, getting the bonus, all of these things we all did because it made the game longer and gave us a few much needed serotonin hits that the original was lacking. So I really leaned into those things that we all collectively agreed made the game better. I even amplified them, with the exception of lengthening the game. I definitely shortened it, I promise. And yeah, my goal here was simple. Make Monopoly play in a much more reasonable time frame, remove player elimination, give the players much more agency and depth of strategy while playing, and of course, make the game more fun than it originally was. And I really kept that last one as my focal point here. I do think I've hit it out of the park in terms of making a game that will actually scratch that nostalgia itch, actually feel like Monopoly, while being enjoyable, actually being a really fun experience. I've had the opportunity to play test this a handful of times now, and I'm telling you, people have been loving it. It's not perfect. I didn't try to make it perfect. If you look closely at the board, I've got errors all over the place. I've corrected them in the print and play files that I am going to link in my Discord. You will see the link to the Discord in this video as well as on my profile. You can join that, and we do have the print and play files for free if you want to download it and try this yourself. Please, if you do, comment or jump in the Discord and tell me how you enjoyed it, what you think I did right, what we can change. But let me remind everyone, we are still doing the giveaway for the 20th anniversary Deluxe Kickstarter edition of Bus from Splotter and Capstone Games. And I'm sure you're sick of me saying those exact words in every video, but we're actually going to run this very soon. So this is one of the last opportunities to get in and join. I did a whole video walking through all the rules. Basically, you have to subscribe, you have to be in the United States, and every one of the videos of mine that you comment on will be one entry into the giveaway. And I'm planning on running this very soon, like hopefully in the next month, if not sooner. And if you would like to see me draw the winner live, I will post the day and time in the Discord. You can actually watch me pull the winner in real time. And that being said, I think we're ready to jump into this thing. let's dive into an overhead view of what makes this different. So obviously no player elimination. You're not playing to get all the properties and everybody's money and knock everybody out. You are playing for objectives, for victory points, essentially. You have, of course, global objectives and then some private objectives. Because come on, how can you have a modern board game and not have global and private objectives? Let's be serious here. You have a variety of different in-game triggers that ensure that the game does not run for too long, making this a much shorter game. I will say most of the playtesting I've done at 3 players, we were done in an hour, if not less, maybe an hour and a half at most. At 4 players, usually about an hour and a half. At 5, it was playing about 2 hours. I think I had one game that did push 2.5 hours. Any more than that is probably just due to table talk. I haven't really had a chance to do too much 6-player testing, just besides myself running through the motions. One of the really big differences in vanilla Monopoly, you traverse the board and land on properties and then attempt to buy them. In this version, I actually deal out all of the properties up front. So everyone has a handful of properties to begin with, and you have to land on your property to build on it. But the catch is you have to be setting only property that you hold a deed for to build on it. And landing on another player's property allows you to attempt to buy it from them. They basically make a cash offer, you accept or decline. There is no negotiation back and forth, or the bank pays the rent for the property. And the reason being is because that keeps an influx of money, which keeps players doing different things, which makes the game run smoother, which doesn't turn it into so much of a game about undercutting each other as it turns into a game of building up your own control and wealth. It's still very competitive, but does not feel like you're just punching each other in the face the whole time. The dice. There was an older variation of Monopoly that came with a third dice that actually allowed you to manipulate your roll, and I thought that was super cool. I even initially thought about removing the dice, and I had a few different ideas. Some friends gave me ideas, but I kept finding that it didn't feel like Monopoly without the dice. So I thought about that version of Monopoly that allowed you to adjust the dice and said, well, you really don't even need the third dice. How about when you roll it, you can either take the full number of the 2 dice combined or either single dice, which means you always have at least 2 or 3 choices. You would have 2 if the dice landed on the same number. But in this case, I would have a 5, a 3, or a 2, which gives me quite a bit of agency on the board, but it introduces enough luck that it does still feel like Monopoly. Not so much as with Monopoly, you roll it and you go there and you kind of feel like the game is just happening to you. Here, you do feel like you have strategy. You may take a lower number just because you know your next roll, it'll give you better odds of landing where you want. So it does create a brilliant depth of strategy that did not exist before. The free parking jackpot. So in this iteration, anytime you would normally pay money to the bank, it goes straight to the jackpot. And anytime someone lands on the free parking space, they collect that jackpot. And this thing builds up fat. Hitting it is a big deal. People jump up in excitement or get terribly angry because they were going for it and someone rolled the perfect number. It has been one of the fun and most amusing parts of playtesting. Railroads you cannot own, same with utilities, but the railroads specifically, when you land on them, you pay the $200 and then you move to any other railroad you want to move to. So you have 3 different options. This means you can traverse the board way quicker. I can jump way over there to try to build on one of my properties and then get back over here in just a few turns to try to hit that free parking jackpot. You never really feel like you're 3 turns away from being able to do what you want to do. And with that being said, let's actually dive into the upgrades. So the first thing you're obviously going to notice is the decals I've put on the center of the board. I've completely changed the center. So now the center is made up of the free parking jackpot, this top section, obviously the logo. And then in the middle, you have the public objectives. Gain hotels, gain property sets, which are a set of a specific color, such as purple is 3, brown is 2, yellow 3, etc. Gain certain amounts of money. Here's 5K to hit the first one. And land on free parking X times. And then, of course, the in-game triggers we have, if you ever run out of chance cards, chest cards, any player has actually landed on free parking a 5th time, any single player, or when you filled a row on a level 1 public objective, or the supply for houses or hotels run out, And then as a single trigger, the bank runs out of money. All of the others, 2 of those things have to happen. But if the bank runs out of money, the game instantly triggers into the end game. And just a note, the chest cards and chance cards, when they're drawn, you actually keep the ones you've drawn in front of you, and the deck is never reshuffled. So once they're out, they're out. And now let's jump into the sides of the board, what I've done. So if I remove some of these tokens, you'll see I've actually covered the cost section that normally would say how much that property is to buy, and I've covered it with a circle. And that circle obviously is to place a player marker on top of. As all the properties are dealt out at the beginning, these numbers are irrelevant. And it's nice to have your player markers on those spots because at a glance, you can see who controls what. If I land on a property, I don't have to say who has St. James. I can say, okay, yellow player, what do you want for it? And the other numbers that are left, such as utilities and railroad, I left those numbers because those actually are the cost if you land on those properties. And you cannot own the utilities or the railroads. I have added a similar price tag for the jail, which I've made $300 in this game. Basically, anytime you're sent to jail, you pay the $300 fine, and then you just go to the just visiting spot, and your next turn you'll move on any other way. There's no losing turns for going to jail and having to roll to get out. I got rid of all of that. And that's about all of the board upgrades I've done here. Additional components, obviously, I've got, I think, 30 or 40 player tokens in each color. May not have actually needed that many. You can determine how many you actually want to cut out in the files. I do have large player tokens to indicate who is which player, which that's one thing that grinds my gears with modern board games is when they don't have player markers, because there are some games that really need them that do not have them. I'm not going to name anyone, but modern board game designers, come on, this goes so far. So after that, I, of course, have a start player token. I'll explain why that's important later. I do have this extra board for 5 to 6 player. And the reason I did this was because at 5 or 6 player, obviously, money gets tighter. Obviously, people have less properties, less chance of building hotels. So I made an adjustment to the public objectives to make the game still run smoother, finish in a realistic time frame, and be fun. And the game feels a little different at those higher player counts, but it's still very fun. And then this brings us to our last upgrade, and probably the biggest change, is these really cool private objective cards. At the beginning of the game, each player is dealt 2 of these in secret, and you keep them face down. You can look at them whenever you want, but don't ever let anyone else know what you have. And they score at the end of the game. So your public objectives, you're scoring as the game progresses. You have to score them on your turn. This one, for example, is pay electricity company bill X times. It's got a 3 and a 4 on it. There's a separate deck for 5 and 6 player. Finish the game with less than X amount of money. So some really cool ones. One of them is like take X different railroad stations, have X number of houses, quite a few really cool private objectives here. But let's get into the actual big rule changes here. The public objectives, when I said they have to be scored on your turn, they have to be scored at the end of your turn. So when you start your turn, you may have $5,000, but you roll your dice, you carry on, and anything you're going to spend money on occurs. And if you spend too much, well, now the end of your turn, you score any public objective you would actually qualify for. If you spent too much money, now you got to wait till next turn to try it again. And if this happened to be your last turn of the game because someone triggered the end game, well, you're not going to score that at all. If the game has ended, you've already taken your final turn. Even if you qualify for different public objectives, you cannot score them. You missed out. Sometimes people will trigger an end game just to prevent someone from scoring a public objective because they think that's going to help them win. Your private objectives, they do come into play at the end game, so hopefully you've made up your difference there. Oh, there is, of course, the start player token, speaking of additional components. Now, the reason the start player token is important is because when the end game is triggered, the start player has basically already taken their final turn. Everyone else will have an opportunity to get one last turn. It's to ensure that everyone got exactly the same amount of turns in the game. So if the start player happens to be the one who triggers the end game, then everyone but the start player gets one last turn. But if, say, it was player 3 after the start player, then player 4 would take their final turn. Any other players up to the start player would take their final turn, but the start player would not get a final turn. The turns are already equal by the time it got back to them. And the reason I like this is because there are some advantages to being the start player and being earlier in turn order, and I feel like it's nice to have a few disadvantages too to keep it balanced. There is no mortgaging properties anymore. The only way you can ever let go of a property or sell a property is if another player lands on your property and you sell it to them. So let's talk about how that works. So if another player lands on your property, the first thing you do is determine how much you would sell that property for. There's no negotiation up front. You can't say, how much do you got? You know, you may see their stack of money and you can get a general idea, but you can't tell them, hey, fan it out or count it for me. You know, you can look and say, okay, they're probably got XYZ, and then you name a price. So if you really want to sell it, you've got to be a little strategic. How much you think you can really get out of it? You should probably always take into account, what are you currently able to rent it for? What part of the board is it on? Because with this new free parking jackpot, this is seriously the hot zone. There's a lot of players over here a lot. These properties are worth the most in the game because this is where everyone's landing trying to hit that jackpot. That's not to say other properties aren't valuable, but you got to take into account, where is it on the board? How much am I currently getting in rent at that property? And how much do I think they'll bite for? Or alternatively, if you really don't want to sell the property, then just say a crazy number that they can't bite for anyway. So then one of two things occurs. Either A, your offer is accepted, in which case you remove your token, place their token, and then that deed is transferred to the new owner. However, if that didn't occur, their token stays there, they remain in control of that deed, and then rent occurs. So if the player declines for they don't want it or they can't afford it, then rent occurs and the bank pays it to the player who currently holds the deed. No rent occurs if the deed changes hands. And the reason for the bank paying the deed versus the players is it allows the players to continue to chase these objectives without constantly being knocked back, because so many objectives are money determined that if we constantly kept having to trade money for properties, the game would drag out for way too long. And also, when you play Monopoly and all these other properties are basically landmines, you're really trying to dodge them. It really affects a strategy. But if it doesn't really hurt you, it's not going to cost me any money if I land on yellow. It's just going to give them a little bit of a boost. Then it's not that whole landmine thing. And also, it's not that big of a deal if they get a little boost too. There's a little strategy in that, because if I let yellow get that money, they may do me a favor later, but more importantly, that money is now in the actual economy of the game, which means that player is probably going to eventually spend that money to build stuff, and that money is going to go in the free jackpot, in which case then it might come to me. So it creates this really cool symbiotic relationship where you're kind of weighing the pros and cons of letting other players get money. In fact, because your public objectives go down as people score them as a catch-up mechanic in a way to ensure the game does finally end, it means maybe I do want to help yellow get some money real quick, because if yellow actually hit that 4K, well, hell, I can hit the 3K. That's not a problem. So definitely some fascinating additional depth of strategy there. Like I was saying before, if you ever land on your own property, you can immediately build on it. You don't have to worry about color sets. It works the same as ever. You just look at the deed. It will tell you how much each house costs and how much a hotel costs. You obviously have to have 4 houses before you can build a hotel. So if it says houses are 100, hotel is 100, that means a hotel is effectively 500 if you wanted to go from nothing to a hotel. Like I was saying with the railroads, anytime you land on a railroad, you must take it. You spend 200 to the free parking jackpot. You put your token on the railroad, because there is a private objective that says take X number of railroads, as well as a private objective that says have X number of tokens on the board. And there you have it. This is Blankopoly Redux. I'm very proud of it. I think it is very fun. I truly can't wait to get some feedback from some other people on this one. I know a lot of my Discord community has been waiting on this to see what I'm doing. Why have I been playing around with Monopoly for the last month and a half? That's insane. So I hope they enjoy this. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you share it with other people. And I hope maybe even some people are tempted to bring this to a convention and play it. It would be absolutely hilarious to see someone break out a Monopoly board at a board gaming convention. But that's pretty much it for today. I appreciate you watching. I do want to remind everyone about our Discord community. I do want to apologize that this video took so long. Between board game conventions that I've been going to over the last couple months, between COVID hitting me like a truck, and just 2024 having hands. 2024 is got hands. That's all I'm saying. Oh my God. But we're good. We're good over here. Family's fine. We are very happy to finally be back making content. And please don't forget about the bus giveaway. It is seriously happening soon. This is one of your last chances to get in on this. So please comment, subscribe, please share with other people. Let them know about the video. Let them know about the giveaway. And until next time, keep hunting that cardboard and join the Discord. Let me know about the grails you've got your hands on recently, or just cool games you're playing that maybe aren't on my radar. Thanks again. See you guys next time.